I decided rather suddenly after the first year of law school to go to seminary. It was just a few weeks before classes started, and I had a lot to pull together at the last minute. And when it was time for the first day of class, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm going to seminary, I better take a Bible with me. So I grabbed the first one that I could find that was close by and went out the door. And then we got into my first Bible class that day. And I looked down, and I had grabbed a children's living Bible that had a picture of Jesus as a shepherd on the front cover, and then lots of pictures all throughout. And I looked around and saw the people who had tabbed, annotated, leather-bound Bibles that had been, and I felt quite inadequate. Except that the Lord is my shepherd is always my rock and my anchor. And I ended up being pretty glad for that first day that I had that picture there in front of me. Now I want to talk about these passages that are beautiful and heard many times. I want to think a few things about shepherds, about sheep, about good and bad shepherds, and the promises that Jesus makes here. It's really hard for us to relate to this passage about shepherds, I think, in a lot of ways, because most of us have absolutely no connection with what the work of shepherding is. And in fact, that lovely picture of Jesus as the shepherd holding a little lamb in his arms is in some ways deceptive. One, he looks very clean. Jesus looks serene and even well-rested and happy. And actually, shepherding is extremely hard work. I pulled you buy these quirky things at sales. When Upper Arlington was getting rid of a bunch of books, I pulled a book that I took with me for a nickel that was photos that had been put together by someone in the early 70s, I think. You know, there's still a lot of large sheep shepherding ranches out in the west in the mountains. And a lot of the people who come there with experience to do those jobs are actually imports from the Basque region in Spain, where the art of shepherding is a millennial old art, going back 2,000, 3,000 years before Christ even. And so some of these gentlemen come over and live in the mountains of Idaho, doing sheep herding, and there were photos and kind of biographical accounts of their work, which were really fascinating. And it is extremely difficult work. A shepherd provides basic health care for animals when they are far out of the reach of vets. Even today, I think probably when everyone's assisted by cell phones and other kinds of technology that are really pretty new, you're still in remote areas, and when an animal is distressed and in trouble, you have to do basic first aid. That includes the birthing process, and lambs often need assistance to be born, and it's messy, hard work. And during lambing season, which I believe we've just come through, it is 24/7 on-call round the clock. And you have to be out in the elements no matter what the weather's like. And it is a labor that can only be sustained by love and care. You have to understand the environment and the climate very, very well. You have to know how to take the animals away from brackish water and to fresh flowing water. You have to know how to find the right grasses and not to overgraze an area. There are poisonous plants that can harm sheep, and you have to know how to identify those plants and to keep them away from that. You also have to be very good at training dogs, because from what I understand, dogs are absolutely indispensable to the work of herding sheep. There's actually a gentleman in England who's written a modern account of shepherd's life in his area of northwestern England, where it's still a millennial-old practice. And he said, if you have 500 sheep, it would take 200 shepherds to keep them all together. But if you have 20 shepherds with about 6 good dogs, you can manage 500 sheep. So shepherds need to know how to manage dogs and train them, and so that they manage the sheep. You have to protect them from predators. Apparently, it's really, really easy to take advantage of a sheep or a lamb. They are not having a lot of natural protection on their own. They're easy to take out, and actually even in dogs can do quite a bit of damage to sheep. Work very, very long hours. You really have to, particularly if you're grazing in large pastures, which you need to move the animals continually so they are finding fresh places to eat. You can't always bring them all the way back at night. You may have to stay out there near them so that you can kind of keep them protected in that environment. And I think another feature, you have to be able to bear the solitude of time in which you're on your own a lot. You have to be able to stand the presence of your own company. So Jesus, in Gospel of John, in the passage that Jen started out reading, it's kind of confusing to just jump right in. It sounds very abstract and it is metaphorical, but Jesus talking about some shepherds who can't be trusted, whose motivation is really just to steal and destroy, and other shepherds whose voice is known to the sheep. And it helps a lot to understand that Jesus starts talking like this really as a commentary on everything that's gone before in John chapter 9, which is a long chapter, and it's an extended story on multiple levels of the healing of a man who was born blind. And I'm going to walk you through it real fast. There was a man who was born blind. Jesus and the disciples see him. Jesus' disciples ask him, is it this man's fault or is it his parents' fault? Who sinned that he was born blind? Jesus said neither one was the case. He was born blind so that the glory of God might be revealed in him. And then Jesus goes to the man and he scoops up dirt, he spits into the dirt, he makes mud out of it, and he puts it on the man's eyes and tells him to go to the pool of Siloam and wash his eyes off, and he'll see. The man does what he is asked to do, which is really kind of an amazing thing. Think about that. You can't see who's come up to you, obviously. They come and they put stuff on your eyes and give you instructions to go find a place to wash it off, and you go and do that. So then the man starts telling people about it. People notice he's seeing, and they ask him, how did this happen? And he says, well, I don't really know how it happened. This man, Jesus, said these things. I did what he told me, and now I can see. And then there are people who are upset about this because that work of creating dirt, mud together, putting it on the eyes was work, and apparently it was on the Sabbath. And they were upset that the man was healed. And so they complained and tried to probe him and nail him down. Well, who is that guy? Who did this to you? He said, I don't know, but I think he's a prophet. Well, they can't accept that. They can't accept it at all because that doesn't fit in their sense of what a prophet would do. A prophet would obey the rules. A prophet would not do that on a day that was meant for rest. And so they then go to the man's parents and say, what really happened here? They have already heard that it's going to be problematic for them to make claims that make Jesus seem pretty important, pretty special, maybe God's agent. And so they say, we don't really know what happened. Go ask him. So they go back to the man and say, how can this be? He said, a little bit more. First he said, I don't know. Then he said, I think he's a prophet. Then he says, how can you not see? This is a good thing. He opened my eyes. I see. They said, oh, can't be. Must not be following the rules. It's got to be from some other power. Bad thing. When the man wouldn't buy that, it says they drove him out. They couldn't handle this kind of break in their system of understanding. And his presence, his insistence that this was a good thing, done by a good person, one of God's works. They couldn't handle that, and they drove him out. And then finally, Jesus goes and finds him again and says, do you know what happened to you? And he says, do you believe in the Son of Man? And the man says, I don't know. Well, who is the Son of Man? Tell me who he is so I can believe in him. And Jesus says, it's me. And he says, I believe. Long story. And then, after people are protesting and processing that, then Jesus gives this teaching about the Good Shepherd and the Bad Shepherd. The Good Shepherd can be identified as the one who leads someone into healing and into whole new life and understanding. In the process of this lengthy kind of series of exchange, the man not only gets his sight, he sees life differently. He sees the source of goodness. He makes a profession of faith. He has grown in his view of everything in the world. Because when you believe that God is good and is acting in the world, you don't see anything else exactly the same. Now I want to talk about sheep. I think a lot of us like the image of the Lord as the shepherd. It's so sweet and kind. The image of ourselves as sheep is a little bit harder. I had a friend who was in Emmaus. I got to know through the Emmaus walk, and she was someone who was kind of returning to interest in faith after kind of rocky period early in her life. She had grown up in a church and then was kind of wild in college. She had a child born out of wedlock and trying to raise him on her own, and tried to go back to her home church. And she, in our share group, said to me, you know, the minister preached a wonderful sermon on the 99 sheep and the one lost lamb, and how Jesus left the 99 to go out and look for the lost lamb. Now, she had not felt like that pastor had been particularly welcoming to her as she was coming back into life of that congregation. She said, I just wish he understood that I could be a lost lamb too. So sometimes we want to believe. I notice it's good for people to come back and find shelter and find a safe place. King Avenue is a safe place. People come back and find welcome and shelter. At least we aspire to be. But I wanted to say, you know what? Keep hanging around. Keep trying to be part of the flock. Keep trying to get back into your relationship with God. Hang in there. To be a sheep means you're trying to follow, and you want to follow. Give it time. So the word for us, I think, is to grow in our trust of the Lord as our shepherd. Richard, do you remember that one day we were at Trinity in the parking lot? I have a German Shepherd, by the way. I used to. My son has it now. But I love that dog. And I was at Trinity at the time, and that dog, the German Shepherd, Cole, was following me over to work because he didn't have to be on a leash when we were right at home, right in the neighborhood. And there were two little boys who were riding their bikes during the summer around Trinity's empty, vast parking lot. And they were having a whale of a time. I had gone over to talk to Richard. I'm sure you don't remember this, but I remember it. And those little boys were just all over the place. And I was a little bit worried that there was going to be a car that pulled in, even though it was pretty empty. But Cole went up and started I thought he was making friendly with the boys. He was only a year old and he'd never been around a sheep in his life. So I was astonished at what I saw. Very shortly, as I was kind of ignoring the boys and ignoring the dog, I looked out and these boys on their bikes were being shepherded into riding in a perfect circle, huge circle out in the parking lot. That dog was running from one to the other, just curving them back inside. And I thought, does boys know what's happening? They looked so happy, so happy. They didn't even know, they didn't even feel that they were being shepherded. They were just enjoying being in that safe space together. One of the things I read in that book on shepherding from the Basque shepherds transplanted here, one of them said, you can tell the difference between a good shepherd and a bad shepherd. A good shepherd keeps the sheep together too tightly, is always giving orders to the dogs. The dogs are always hauling them back in. It makes the sheep nervous, but they stay together. And a good shepherd watches and learns the behavior of the natural instincts of the sheep and just kind of channels them to keep them safe and to guide them. The word for me today was through the good times and the bad, through the ups and downs of faith, high and low, I need to grow in my appreciation that the Lord is a good shepherd. Amen.